Today we talk about The Pocket at Falaise, the game that comes with Against the Odds magazine issue 27. This game is designed by Ted Racer, the same designer of the famous game Paths of Glory. However, this is not a card-driven game, and it is not about World War I. Still, the name was what got me interested and curious about this game. This game is about World War II, and it covers the trap that was set by the Allies against the German armies that were trying to retreat from Normandy, and the Allies trying to encircle them and to capture as many of them as possible. So this is a two-player game in which you have the Allied player that will try to capture the German units, and the German player that will have to find the balance between finding units that will stay behind and find other units that will just run away, maybe units that will come back to try to help the ones that have been left behind to get out. So very different gameplay, very different objectives and strategies, but this is the situation, which is definitely an interesting situation to start with. Let's see how it is represented in the game. This is the map for the game with the game set up and ready to start. As you can see at the beginning of the game, the majority of the units are committed to a single front line. On the outside of the front line, you have the Allied units that are applying pressure against the Axis units, and on the inside, with some gaps, you have the Axis units that are trying to escape from the trap. And the game will always look more or less like this at the beginning, but there is some variety in the setup because the front line is divided in segments, and each course at the beginning of the game is assigned a certain segment, but within that segment you can place the units belonging to that course any way you want. So sometimes you will want to spread them out in that segment, sometimes you want to concentrate them more, so there's some variety, and game after game you can try different scenarios with these slightly different setups. The main goal for the Axis player is to move units across the withdraw line. You don't see it very well here, but this is more or less where it is. So if he moves units across that line, then he gains victory points. Also, there are victory points for control of Argentan at the end of the game, and the Axis player also gains some victory points for exiting units from the southern edge of the map. The Allied player, as you can imagine, earns victory points by eliminating German units. Typically, turn opens with the Allied player executing artillery attacks and airstrikes just to soften up the enemy before moving against him. At the beginning, the Allied player rolls a die to determine how many airstrikes will be available that turn, and then he executes airstrikes and artillery attacks. He can execute an artillery attack with each of the corps represented by these cheats. This would be the 7th, the 30th, and each cheat has two ranges, regular range and long range, and that depends on the position of the unit from that course that you decide that will be declaring the attack. So you choose a target that is within range of a unit belonging to that course, and then you roll a die, you apply modifiers, and then you see if you have been able to do damage to the opponent or not. Airstrikes work in the same exact way, but they have no range. You can use them to attack anybody on the map. However, if you use these attacks to attack enemy units that are adjacent to your own, then there's a chance that you are also inflicting friendly fire against your own units, but well, that's a chance that you have to decide whether you want to take or not. Then the main turn starts, and during the turn the players will activate their units a course after the other by drawing activation chits from a cup and by activating the unit indicated by the chit. For example, somebody drew the 74th, then the German player is allowed to activate all units belonging to the 74th course. A course can be activated for assault or for movement/mechanized assault, not for both. If you choose assault, then any and all of the units of the activated course can attack adjacent enemies, but no one can move. In this case, for example, these 3 units of the 74th would be able to attack these 2 American units, but that would be all. If the player chooses movement/mechanized assault, then he can move any and all of the units belonging to the activate course, but then he can attack only with mechanized units and with infantry units stacked with the mechanized units that move during that turn. So this is the general idea that you find also in a million other games that activate units by pulling chits, but here there are a couple of twists that give more flexibility to the activation system. For example, 3 times per turn, the German player is allowed to attach non-activated units to units of the course that just activated. He can do that if the non-activated units are adjacent to or no farther than 2 axes from units of the course that just activated. Again, suppose that I just drew the 74th, then I can also activate this unit here and this other unit here that do not belong to the 74th, but for this turn they will behave exactly as if they were part of the 74th. So that gives you more flexibility and more options in the way you design your strategy. The ally player has some extra flexibility when it comes to mechanized assaults. In fact, he can reinforce a mechanized assault by using non-activated units that are adjacent to the activated units at the beginning of the mechanized assault. In a similar fashion, he also has the option of reinforcing an assault by using units from a non-activated course as long as they are adjacent to the target hex. Another factor that will influence the activation system is the 58th Panzer Course, represented by this cheat here. The German player does not place it in the cup. He can play it at any time in turns from 1 to 4. This course historically was instructed not to fight but to direct the traffic of the retreating German units. So when this cheat is played, then the German player can activate any and all of his units that are south or west of this river and that have not been activated yet, and all those units can be used to perform a move/mechanized assault action. The interesting thing is that if they end that move/mechanized assault still south or west of this river, they don't count as spent. They can still activate when their cheat is drawn later, so that makes them particularly fast in the first part of the game. Then the German player will lose that advantage, but at the beginning the 58th is really an important element in the game. An event that can happen once per game is the German counterattack, and that can only happen after turn 4. When the German player declares the German counterattack, then he can activate a course that already has units behind the German withdrawal line. He can attach up to 3 units that do not belong to the activated course and make them part of that course for that turn. He can also bring in units that he may have removed from the map at setup precisely to save them as part of the counterattack. So all of these units would be able to form the German counterattack force, and they're brought in the game trying to clear the way for the units that are still struggling to get out of the pocket. Units in this game project a zone of control in the 6 hexes surrounding them, and they can fire at enemies that enter the zone of control, but interestingly enough, they can also fire at enemies that are exiting their zone of control. This is very important because remember, in this game many times infantry can either move or assault, and you may have cases where the allied player is running after the Germans. He manages to move infantry adjacent to German units, but he cannot fire at them this turn. Well, at least he can upfire at them next time that German unit activates and moves away from the allied unit. To resolve upfire, you roll a die, you apply the modifiers, and you see the effects on this table here. Now, when you saw these counters here, you probably guessed that this number here is combat, but if you thought that this other number here is movement, well, you were mistaken. This number here is tactical efficiency rating that is used to modify several situations in the game. For example, if the moving unit has a higher tactical efficiency than the other unit, which would be the firing unit, then the firing unit receives a -1. If the moving unit that is entering or exiting a zone of control is less tactical efficient than the unit that is upfiring, then the upfiring unit receives a +1. And since you do not have movement printed on the counters, then you have to calculate movement every time that you activate a course. So the units will have a variable number of movement points each time that they activate. For the course that you just activated, you roll a die, you modify that number based on several factors. For example, the Germans during the day are slowed down by the Allied air interdiction, and then using the modified number, you find the basic number of movement points that units in that course have for that turn. But this is only the basic number, because then individual units will modify that number based on their individual tactical efficiency ratings. For example, units that only have 1 or 2 will have -1. In this case, with a 4, those units will be able to move 5 movement points. Units with a 3 have the standard number printed there, and units with a higher tactical efficiency rating actually move 2 extra movement points, 2 more than the basic movement allowance given by the die roll. Assault combat is resolved in a very straightforward way. You calculate the combat odds by dividing the combat factor of the attacker by that of the defender. You roll a die which is modified by terrain and whether or not it's a night turn. You cross-reference and you find the result, which can be that the attacker loses 1 step, contact, which means nothing happens, defender retreats, both lose 1 step, defender loses 1 step, or defender eliminated. Pretty standard procedure. But things can be spiced up quite a bit by the fact that combat results can be modified depending on the tactical rating of the units involved in the combat. For example, attacker loses 1 can be modified and treated as a contact, no effect. If the attacker has higher tactical efficiency, contact, there would be no effect, can actually become a defender retreats or both lose 1. If the attacker has higher tactical efficiency, the defender also can have advantages if the defender has higher tactical efficiency. So I like the variability that comes from this. I like also the fact that it makes eliminating units with high tactical efficiency much harder. And what I really like is how the small number printed at the bottom right corner of the counters, the tactical efficiency rating, really manages to pack a lot of information in it. So you don't have to go through counters that are just overcrowded with different numbers. It is a very economic way to represent a lot of different nuances and modifiers that will depend on the tactical efficiency rating. The game, when you look at the initial setup, may look a little scripted. An army just trying to run out and the other army is trying to crash them before they leave the map. But as you play it, you see that really this game is swarming with options. The players can do a lot of things. The activation system gives you a lot of unpredictability, but yet you do not feel that you're at the mercy of random forces, because you can play around the activation system a little bit by using units from formations that haven't been activated. Again, you have a degree of unpredictability that does not make the game completely chaotic. It just actually makes it perfect for solitaire gameplay. You have rules to play it solitaire proper, but because of all these things that I just mentioned, it is just as fun if you're playing it 2-player by yourself and you switch sides from the Allied to the German side. It is just a fun game that creates a strong story, and different parts of the game do play differently and gives you a strong historical sense. There are even more chromatic factors, historical elements that I could mention in this review, but all that flavor, all that chrome never gets in the way of gameplay. Still, gameplay is pretty tight. But you have then this narrative in which you have the Germans at the beginning are helped by the 58th, and they start moving real fast, and the Allied players like, how can I ever catch up with these guys? Also, closing the pincers seems pretty hard, because at the bottom of the pincer you have the city of Argentan, where you have quite a strong American formation that is stuck there until they can take the city. So at the beginning the Germans seem to have the upper hand, but then the 58th is not there to help them anymore. The Allied units from the back start running after them. Argentan will probably fall, and at that point the Americans will start closing the pincers, and then things may look really bad for the German player. But at that point the German player may be able to launch a counterattack. I would say that it's a game that keeps you on. This is a game that keeps you on your toes, because you always have the feeling that one player is in advantage and the other player is in disadvantage, but luckily enough these two roles change throughout the game, and that really makes this game intriguing. It really makes you, let's play more, I want to see what happens next. Will I be able to preserve my advantage? Will I lose it? Will I be able to catch up? It is just a fun game. Overall, I think it is much more fun and engaging than the majority of magazine games that you find out there these days, because it is just a fun situation. It has agonizing moments for both players. It has very interesting options. It plays very well. It is a tight, intriguing wargaming experience. It's a very good game. I really recommend it.